Welcome to the fifth of 5 webinars in our series, Feeding the Future, Sustainable Food for People and Planet. I am Kelli McCune, Project Director of Conservation Incentives at Sustainable Conservation. For those that don't know us, we are a nonprofit dedicated to helping California thrive by uniting people to solve the toughest challenges facing our land, air, and water. Every day we bring together farmers, communities, scientists, government, and others to steward the resources we all depend on in ways that are just and make economic sense. We decided to put on this Feeding the Future webinar series because as we navigate the pandemic and the awareness it has raised around our food system, we've also been experiencing climate change impacts like major fires, a worsening drought, and it's a good time for all of us to rethink and redouble our focus on what we can collectively do to address climate change. This webinar series has focused on our global food system because we need to figure out at that global scale how to feed a population that's expected to reach 10 billion people by 2050, and doing so in a way without destroying the planet. Addressing our food system is critical to successfully addressing climate change and other environmental issues. And California has a big role to play in that. If you've not had a chance to listen to our other webinars, the recordings are on our website at suscon.org. We covered topics including the critical role of our food system, water in California as it relates to agriculture, food waste, and the environmental sustainability of California's dairies. Now, turning to today's webinar, I could not be more excited to have this conversation about soil health with our 3 panelists. Prior to introducing them, we'd like to get to know our audience a bit better, and we have 2 poll questions for you to fill out. Yeah, thanks so this is about what organization or sector do you work with, and then how do you rate your level of knowledge on the topic of soil health? Just give it a little bit more. There's about 70% of the vote in, so to speak. Okay, great. So let's see. It looks like we have most people from the nonprofit sector, followed by other and government, and then rounding out with agriculture, a few academics, business, and students. Then it seems like we have a fair amount of knowledge on the topic of soil health in the room, while others may know a little bit or a good amount, and a couple experts. So that's great. Thank you for that. And now let's see if we share results. You all can see that. Okay, it looks like we'll start introductions now. I am honored to introduce our 3 panelists. I'll begin with Sara Tiffany. She's the Director of Ecological Farming at the California Alliance with Family Farmers. In her role, she leads the organization's Climate Smart Farming Program and the Ecological Pest Management Program. She works with farmers, researchers, and others to investigate and promote more climate smart practices throughout California. For years, Sara has worked to promote sustainable agriculture, both in the classroom and in the field, not just here in the state, but in other places like Costa Rica, Ecuador, and India. Beyond her professional experience, Sara brings her know-how to this work from growing up on a small-scale organic walnut ranch on the Central Coast. Welcome, Sara. Next,
Thanks,
Rosie Oh, great. Yes, thank you. And next, we have Rosie Burroughs of Burroughs Family Farms. Rosie and her husband, Ward, and their children co-own and co-manage a group of interconnected farms located in Stanislaus County. They produce grass-based meats and eggs, organic olive oil, raw organic almonds, and Gouda-style cheese. With 45 plus years of farming experience, Rosie brings a wealth of knowledge to this conversation. And last year, the Burroughs Family Farms were awarded the California Leopold Conservation Award, which celebrates the outstanding environmental stewardship of California's farmers and ranchers. With our partners at Sand County Foundation, American Farmland Trust, California Farm Bureau, we present this annual award to a winner selected by a blue ribbon panel of judges. Nominations for 2021 are currently open through July 15th, and please check out our website for more information about applying. Welcome, Rosie. And to round out our panel, we have Dr. Tim Bowles, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Environmental Science, Policy and Management at UC Berkeley. Tim's research is at the intersection of agroecology, soil ecology, and biogeochemistry, where he is asking questions about agriculture's resilience to environmental change under different types of management systems. I want to highlight his dedication to teaching. Tim was one of 3 faculty selected for this year's UC Berkeley Graduate Assembly Faculty Mentor Award. It honors those who have shown outstanding commitment to mentoring, advising, and supporting graduate students. Welcome to all 3 of you, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us, Kelly. We're excited to be here.
It's an honor to be here, and we salute all of the efforts that are helping our California state with sustainable conservation practices in this webinar.
Thanks, Rosie. Well, from our audience, kind of our poll helps us understand, I think people are familiar with soil, whether you dug in the dirt as a kid, you may be doing some gardening around your home these days. People are familiar with soil. But to start the conversation, I'd appreciate each of you briefly commenting on how can we better understand what is soil health? And Sara, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, happy to. One of my favorite topics, in fact. So, you know, I guess first of all, when I think about soil health, when we're talking about health, I think, you know, it's important to note that we're automatically implying that it's a living ecosystem, right? And while for some of that, that's become a very familiar concept, but it wasn't too long ago that at least in US agriculture, soil was just viewed as what the stuff in the ground that holds the plant in place, right? So our understanding of soil has really evolved. And this idea of soil health, I think, really captures the idea that it very much is a living ecosystem with a huge amount of life in the soil, and that life in the soil, whether we're talking about bacteria or fungi or archaea or earthworms or whatever we may be talking about, they play a huge role in influencing the really important functions of the soil. So not only supporting plant life and providing an ecosystem for roots, but also nutrient cycling and you know, sequestering carbon and having water move through and filter down into our aquifers. So you know, I've been really encouraged as our understanding of soil health has really taken more of a systems approach, an ecosystems approach. And I think that, you know, as we further develop that framework and fill in the science, we're going to learn more and more, because in my humble opinion, I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg in terms of our understanding. So.
Great. And Tim, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's great, Sara. Thank you. And I think especially following up on that last point about kind of being at the tip of our understanding, you know, soil is sometimes described as like the last terrestrial frontier, right? Meaning like we understand a lot about the earth, but we understand probably the least about soil. because it's this incredibly complex environment. It might not seem like that when if you just kind of are walking around, you pick it up, it looks pretty uniform, maybe you see some earthworms, but if you could zoom in to the scale that these tens of thousands of different species of microbes are actually living and operating, it is an incredibly complex environment. And so what soil health does is it functions as this metaphor, right? And science and society uses metaphors all the time to help explain things that that are hard to get our head around, right? So think about like describing DNA as a blueprint, right? Okay, DNA is not literally a blueprint, but it helps us understand what DNA is doing. And so soil health can serve this similar role by emphasizing and helping us understand how we impact soil in terms of how it functions, and that is its health, right? If you look up a definition of health, the Oxford English Dictionary would tell you that it's about how something functions. And so, just like, I'm not that kind of doctor, I'm not a physician, but like I would argue that, our own health is largely a product of the genes that we have, so who our parents are, the environment in which we live, if that environment is polluted or not, and then also the actions that we take to take care of ourselves, what we eat, how we exercise. And soil has a very analogous set of controls that determine its health. It has parents, it has the rocks from which it was formed. It was formed in a particular place. That kind of sets the inherent characteristics of soil that we can't really change much on any like time scale that matters much. But then we can also, through our own actions, take care of soil or not. And it's through those actions that we can influence how soil functions. We can impact the soil, the life that lives in soil, the organic matter that fuels that life. And all these things together kind of dictate how healthy the soil is and whether we as individual farmers or as a society as a whole are getting the benefits that we could from a healthy soil. So it really plays this strong role, I think, as metaphor to connect us a little bit more, both across as researchers, as farmers, as just people who care about the environment. We can all kind of get around this concept.
Thanks, Tim and Sara. And kind of that tip of the iceberg, it's complex, and yet we do have this ability to understand what is health in terms of function and kind of where that is made up from in our background, so to speak, and soil relates to that. Rosie, from your perspective, how would you help us understand what is soil health?
Thank you. I ditto everything that Sara and Tim said, and I appreciate all the beautiful words that were used to describe soil health. From our farmer's perspective, I would like to say that soil health, and I'll just use some very simple descriptions, but soil health is life, but not just living, as Tim said, but living in a healthy lifestyle, from the microbes in the soil to the birds in the air. And I would really like to say that since soil is part of our planet, I would say for our entire planet, soil health impacts all life. And we need to remember that what we cannot see doesn't mean it's not there. So in 1 teaspoon of healthy soil, there are more microbes than people on the planet. So we need to think about life and the interconnectedness, because we are all have this interrelationship with one another. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And I forgot in my moderator duties to orient our audience to the toolbar at the bottom. There's a Q&A box. Please go ahead and pop in your questions as they come to you. We'll have a discussion together here with the 4 of us and then move to your questions. So get those going in the Q&A box. If you have any technical difficulties, I believe the chat window is where that goes. So in terms of thinking about healthy soil, I immediately think, oh, well, what are the benefits of healthier soil? I know there's some examples here, but Tim, can you start us off with painting a picture of some examples? What are benefits of healthier soils?
Yeah, no, I think that's, I think that's what it comes down to is, Sara kind of started off thinking about this in terms of, a healthy soil is not just one that we grow crops in. It's also one that provides this whole suite of benefits. And so we have to start thinking about just what do soils do? As Rosie mentioned, they're this absolutely vital part of our ecosystem. And they help filter water before it reaches groundwater. They help intercept and store water. They provide nutrients to plants and help capture and store nutrients. And so, but when a soil's been degraded, its capacity to provide these benefits degrades in tandem with that. And so I think especially, recognizing that in the West right now, we're facing the worst drought at the earliest point in the season in the 21st century, possibly in hundreds of years. I want to just focus a little bit on the water-related benefits of soil health. We hear a lot about soil in terms of its potential role for carbon sequestration, and that's really important. But we also, and so that's thinking about how do we, mitigate climate change, but we also have to think about how do we adapt to climate change? It's here, it's not in the future. And so thinking about healthy soil's role in terms of water use, in California, this agriculture consumes most of our fresh water. And soil health could allow us to use these water resources wisely. And so for instance, we know that as soil health increases, the structure of soil improves, it becomes more sponge-like. That way, when it does rain, hopefully sometime in this fall, we'll see a little bit more of that, that soil can both intercept more water, leaving less to run off, and also store more water. So that matters even in an irrigated agricultural system, because it might mean that next spring, when plants are starting to grow or when crops are being planted, that first irrigation might be able to be delayed by an additional week or 2 weeks, thus saving water early on. We also know that healthier soils bring a lot of beneficial microbes. These are really cool things like arbuscular mycorrhizae that form these associations with plant roots. And they can help plants and crops deal with water stress so that crops can produce well even when they're under water stress. So this matters because if farmers aren't receiving the surface water allocations that they normally do, or they're forced to pump more groundwater, that even if they're not able to apply the ideal amount of water, crops may not suffer as much if they have this robust kind of microbial life in the soil that can help plants deal with this stress. And then it's not just water quantity too that we have to think about, right? It's also water quality, particularly water quality in our groundwater, in our aquifers, which provide drinking water to a lot of Californians. And so a healthier soil can help supply more nutrients and thus reduce inputs of fertilizers that often are leading to these water quality impacts. And a lot of the practices agricultural practices that are used to build healthy soils also directly help prevent losses of nutrients. So I'm thinking in particular practices like winter cover cropping, where a lot of the nitrates that are leached in California agriculture happens over the winter during our rainy season. And if we have roots in the ground, they can take up those nutrients, prevent them from being leached. So these are just two of the many benefits, but I think, thinking about these water impacts is so critical right now, both from the standpoint of just how do we adapt to this future of really variable water resources, and also how do we help create clean drinking water, clean water for fish and kind of our whole society here in California. So I'll stop there, just thinking about those couple of benefits.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's so timely given, we feel these impacts of climate change through water, whether it's the lack of right now with drought or other extreme weather events, and then really connecting it to a very important issue around clean water for people and nature. So thank you for that. And Tim, from there, I think Sara will go next to, let's bring this to the farm level. How, in thinking about the benefits, it's really exciting, but also we got to figure out operationally just what's practical for a farmer to do. And can you help us start thinking about, given how many farmers you're working with, how does a farmer figure out what soil health practices work for them?
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really important piece of the conversation because, as our science is telling us more and more about these benefits all the time, but ultimately, if we're interested in, for example, increasing the adoption of soil health management practices on farms, there's a huge people component there, and we need to recognize that the real experts in the room or in the field are the people in the field. They're the people that are stewarding that land. And one of the ways that, I like to, I guess, remind myself to frame it is that, really the farm is the original laboratory, right? So that's where an incredible amount of learning happens. And I've been really lucky to do a lot of on-farm research and trial stuff with different farmers and get to be part of their learning process. And I think one of the huge takeaways that I've had is just the amount of diversity out there in terms of, how people are managing a given cropping system, whether it's, single crop like walnuts or it's a diversified vegetable system, how they're interacting with their soil type and their microclimate, and even to the extent of how it's influenced by the way that they show up in the market. So all of these things affect their management practices and the decisions they make on a daily basis. And I would say that, a really important piece of it is when farmers really grasp the importance of soil health, it's really the principles that drive them towards, this implementation. And what ends up happening in my view is that there's, ultimately a whole lot of trial and error and a whole lot of learning over many times years, sometimes decades. I'm sure Rosie is going to tell us about that. But you take a single practice, for example, if we're talking about cover cropping, can be implemented in so many different ways, from the kinds of plants you're planting to the timing to how you decide to, manage it in the springtime or when you're sort of done with the benefits of cover crop. There's an incredible diversity in terms of how folks can implement it, what a soil health management practice actually looks like on the farm. And what I think is really important is to remember that knowledge and that experience is held by the farmers and the stewards of the land, and that they have a huge amount to contribute in terms of contributing to anything from just communicating with other farmers what they've learned over the years to informing the research that we're doing, right? Because they have a really up close and personal relationship with, well, what are the gaps in knowledge? What would actually help the implementation of these different soil health management practices? And I'll let Rosie say more about that.
Great, thanks, Sara. And I'm hoping, Rosie, do we still have you with us? Yes, and we would love to hear your story. I think this is where, what does it look like for a farmer to figure out what works for their operation? This one of my favorite parts of my job is talking to farmers about their story. Do you want to share a little bit about yours?
I would love to share a story. May I share my screen of some photos from the farm? And
we would love that.
Okay, great. I am not sure why this isn't quite working right now. For some reason, it doesn't want to forward. Let me stop sharing for a second while I find out what happened.
Okay.
Just give me a second. I had this on there, but maybe there's something on here that I am not familiar with. I haven't had trouble with this before. Usually when I just put it up, it starts to work.
Did you click in the slide when you brought it up?
Let me just go back to my original slide, and I'm going to just go from the beginning. Do you see my screen on there?
Not yet.
Okay, let me go to my share button. For some reason, when I have it on here, do you have the ability, might be my mouse not working right. Do you have the ability to share my screen now? Or do I have to share it?
My technical know-how here.
I think
I'm
you
not
have to
sure.
share it, Rosie. I believe so.
Okay, because I have it on my side, but for some reason, all of the buttons when I have it on here do not show up. Oops. Oh, I don't know what to say.
I know. I appreciate how much effort you put into putting photos together, and it makes it so much more real when we get to see pictures. But I wonder if you can just talk us through a little bit about your story and what it's been like for your family farm to figure out what works on your operation.
I'm gonna try it one more time because I think I'm right here now.
That sounds good.
Okay, so from current slide. All right, let's see. Is that sharing now? Do you see the screen? Okay, great. So I'll just go through this real quick. I just wanted to give you a introduction. We're located in the San Joaquin Valley of northern Merced County. And after 20 years of partnerships with our children, my husband and I are passing down the land and the businesses to our children and grandchildren through succession planning and gifting. And we have a variety of projects and programs and farming enterprises that together we have the ABCs of organic. So we have almonds, beef, chicken, dairies, eggs, and sheep. Most of our products are sold as bulk commodity, and about 1% is added value. I wanted to start here about paradigm shift when we're talking about soil health. And we have to say here that as attending universities and working with all different kinds of consultants, we had to have a major paradigm shift when we changed from conventional farming to organic regenerative farming. And I think it's very important for farmers to know it doesn't happen overnight. Our stewardship starts with our foundation principles, and Sara was talking about some things work, some don't. But if you have your principles being what you make decisions on, this is, I think, what's important for soil health, which is protecting and preserving the health of the soil. And it is from the microbes in the soil to the birds in the sky. And as Tim said, including the air and water, we're all interrelated, all interconnected. And we are truly blessed to be working on our farms and seeing the beauty of God's everyday creation. In talking about Sara's mentioning working with many farmers, we started with, I'd like to say that our regenerative practices have been on all of our land here in California and in Oregon. So we're working on land that is perennials, pastures, and annual. And we're using the no-till or minimal till and really concentrating on minimizing soil disturbance. And cover crops are an important part of the armor that needs to protect the soil health. this is a irrigated pasture for one of our dairies, and this is during the summer we use no-till to overseed the pastures with the diversity of seeds. And I'll just go through this as fast as I can with cover crops, and then we'll have questions afterward. This is a picture, and I love this, of a cover crop showing cereal grains of oats, wheat, barley, triticale, peas, and vetch. Resources for us have been limited, and so we've had to conduct our own research on our farms, trying different methods, different varieties of seed. And I think the most important thing for farmers in transitioning is to have an open mind and be willing to try. This is a planting that we put in a new almond orchard. You can see right behind Ward standing there on the right, the little trees. And on the left is a cover crop planting of mustard and radish. You can see the height, and many farmers are afraid of a lot of volume. But when you start talking about feeding the microbes, then this volume becomes the feed for the microbes below the ground. And on the right side is cereal grain with peas and vetch. All our new plantings are started from day one with cover crop practicing. And I think this is like, until you experience it, most farmers today would not be willing to try it because they're fearful of what they don't know. And this is a cover crop in a younger orchard of almonds, and it has been mowed. So organic matter is the key to feeding the soil, feeding the microbes, for the microbes to be able to feed then the plant roots so that you can have healthy plants. We make all of our own organic matter. This is a Dr. David Johnson's bean stationary compost, and we apply this in our compost teas that we make. Animal grazing is used when and where possible. This is a picture of our organic dairy cows on our irrigated pasture with diversity of plants that we twice a year overseed with a no-till drill. And our chickens follow our sheep and our dairy, and they also graze in our native lands during the winter time. I think it's important to know that animals can graze in orchards. They just have to be out of them 120 days before harvest. This is one I wanted to show because many people wanted to talk about what works and what doesn't work. And this is one of our projects that we tried. We kept the cows and calves together, and it was a beautiful experience, but I would say it did not work. I love Tim talking about the beneficials and the microbes and the interconnectedness. So I think it's important to know that the hedgerows that we've planted, we have a mix of trees, shrubs, and flowers. Again, diversity is really important. And all of the life that is part of our farm all work together. So the beneficials in terms of the beneficial insects and how they help us with pest damage in our trees and on our crops is very, very good. Just beautiful pictures of native plants and flowering plants. Some of our favorite pictures. Again, since we have become organic regenerative farmers, we have new species of birds that come to our farm every year, including migratory birds. And last year in our cover crop, we had hundreds of thousands of painted ladies in our flowering cover crop in our trees. Bees are so important for pollination. All of our farms have hedgerows, which create the habitat for the native bees and pollinators. I think it's important, as Sara said, to really talk about research to validate these practices, and these are just 4 of the research projects that we're currently in. And they have very valuable information. This is one summary. I'm just only going to say a couple things about the summary. But what we found is that after 2 years, the conventional versus regenerative practices, the infiltration rate was 6 times higher in regenerative farms, and the invertebrates in the top 1 inch of soil was 6 times more, and the beneficial insects equalized a conventional farm using sprays and pesticides to our pest damage. So it was really encouraging to know that these practices are making a difference. And then I just wanted to say that this is one of the projects that we're working with, but unless it's viable for a farmer to try these new practices, most of the times they can't afford it. So we need to make sure that farmers are rewarded for their practices, and you can do so. Everyone can be part of the solution by voting with your dollar. I think it's important here that we have to be very careful about greenwashing. And I just wanted to say that if you're putting toxins or pesticides or herbicides on your soil, you are hurting the microbes in the soil. So just in summary, I think the foundation of our soil health starts with using sustainable, organic, regenerative farming practices. And healthy soil equals healthy plants, healthy animals, to healthy people, healthy planet for all living species on the planet. And I think I've shared this slide before, but I really do believe it is that our healthy soil is the foundation of our country. And as a resource of farmers, we need to think of them not as farming and mining things out of the soil, but more of farmers that are using regenerative practices to build soil health for the future. And you just can't, you can't build soil health if you're not thinking in a holistic systems way, because we are all interrelated, interconnected. So I will close my share screen with that now. Okay.
Thank you so much, Rosie. That was wonderful. And I mean, we could go through each photo, and I'd love to hear the story behind really all of it in greater depth, but I'm going to try to move us through just a couple more questions among us for discussion and get to the audience questions. So that was inspiring, and it's incredible to think about the multiple benefits from different soil health practices, but what are the challenges to wider adoption? And Sara, do you want to kick us off here, given how many farmers you're working with?
Sure. Thank you so much for that, Rosie. I always enjoy seeing pictures of your guys' farm. It's so inspiring. Well, I guess just to start off, as excuse me, as Rosie said, for a lot of people, there's a huge financial barrier, right? So the profit margins for farmers to start with are pretty thin. It's really hard work. It's really hard to make it financially as a farmer in the markets we're working in. And so if that's your starting point, and then you start adding on, things like buying compost and buying cover crop seed and doing extra field operations to get those things in the field. If you want to do a practice like planting a hedgerow or doing some, pollinator strips around the edge of your field, these are all wonderful practices. They all cost more money than if we were not doing them. And considering the situation that a lot of farmers are in, it's where we see maybe they're interested in doing it, but they haven't necessarily had the resources, financial information, or even access to technical assistance that would help them get to the point where they could actually try them out. I think another really important barrier to note is land tenure, right? So, for a lot of farmers, and we definitely see this especially with small scale farmers and with historically disadvantaged farmers, you see folks that only have land leases that are, 2 years, 1 year, 5 years. And so if you're thinking about implementing soil health practices, which take time to really yield the benefits, there's less of an incentive to go ahead and put your resources into those practices and actually put in the upfront investment they require. The piece I'm just going to mention, and I'll let Rosie and Tim jump in, but there's definitely a cultural component as well. And I think this exists throughout, it exists within farming communities, within consumer communities, within marketing. And as Rosie said in her presentation, what we really require is a paradigm shift to get to a point where we are actually valuing these whole systems ways of farming in order to lift all of this up. And how that works out, it could look at a lot of different ways. There's a number of programs right now that are trying to incentivize farmers to do these practices, so helping them financially. There's also plenty of talk about is there anything we could do on the market side? I think it's an open question what the solutions are. But I think it's suffice to say that unless we're directly addressing the barriers to adoption, which differ from farm to farm, we're not going to be able to reach our goals. So that's really, it's really important that we engage the experience of farmers and meet them where they're at in terms of being able to address their concerns and their limitations.
Thank you. And Tim, as you answer this, can you also then touch a little bit on some of the solutions? So kind of a two-part, building on what Sara said about challenges and then kind of some of the solutions. So I'll wrap. That's our last question before we get to Q&A.
Yeah, I think I have just two kind of fundamental points that I want to start with. One is that I think a lot of times we focus on individual farmers to fix problems that are much bigger problems. And when we talk about, so we put a lot of responsibility on individual farmers to solve these things. And the second point, and this is related, is that with soil health, building soil health with regenerative approaches or agroecology or whatever terminology you want to use, as Rosie said, the benefits come over the longer term. And as Sara said, the costs in the short term are known and they're real. So planting a hedgerow costs very real dollars right now. Realizing the benefits of that takes a number of years, and it's harder to perceive because you also, in order to actually make that a profitable investment, it might mean, okay, well now, not only do the natural enemies have to come to control those pests, but now you also have to reduce your pesticide inputs to actually reduce your input costs and see the return on that. So the reason I make those 2 points is because there are a lot of things I think that we can do to help take the onus off of individual farmers to solve all of this for us. And I'll start out with, with one comment. Land access and land values are a big barrier. If a farmer's has high rent and they have to maximize their cash crop production, we see this a lot in the Central Coast. For instance, where I do a lot of work, cool season vegetables, farmers might have to plant 2 or 3 different cash crops in a given year in order to make rent, and that limits what they can do in terms of focusing on other things. So we can create more creative ways of thinking about land in terms of conservation easements. The state potentially has a role to play there. We can do what we can to limit, and this is, I think, a big looming problem is a lot of so-called financialization of farmland. So we see a lot of big investors coming in to invest in farmland, like the Harvard hedge fund in Southern California, which is driving up land values. We need to be able to deal with that. And then we also, if these benefits of soil health are for us all, it's not just for an individual farmer. I think we have to say, as a society, how are we going to help pay for that? And so we have programs now in California, like the Healthy Soils Program, which has given 3 rounds of direct grants to farmers. I think around $60 million in total, give or take, to help offset these short-term costs. We can also think about our regulatory programs. So we have a very complex set of regulatory programs around a lot of different things, from water quality to our groundwater. And soil health and soil management needs to be a part of those solutions. And building into these regulatory programs options and incentives for these kind of more systems approaches to dealing with these problems. That was kind of a laundry list there, but I think it at least points us, but the two fundamental points are that as a society, if we want to experience the benefits, we also have to share in the burden and the costs. And we have a lot of different ways of doing that.
Great, thank you. And really now moving into the Q&A, we have a lot here, so I'll try to get to as many as we can. But Rosie, there's so much interest in your family's farm, which is to be expected. It's so exciting. I'll try to shoot 3 at you, and if you can just kind of flow through these all together. One, is your farm open to visits to learn about best management practices in person? Have you used biochar? What do you think about it? And what goes into your compost tea?
Those are very good. I would like to say that I think the best thing that we can do moving forward is to have our farms open. So we do host many events throughout the year to bring education onto the farm and for people to experience the farm. So the answer is yes on that. Could you just go through each question? What other questions were there?
What do you think about biochar? Have you used biochar? And then what's in the compost tea?
Okay, so we have not used biochar. And I think that biochar definitely has its place. We right now have our hands full with what we're doing, and we're trying, it's a journey. So I don't think that any one farm is ever in the perfect place. And I want to make sure I put that out first, is that we are still students of farming. We are definitely feel that our responsibility is not just farmers, but we are stewards of taking care of the land. So we have not tried that yet. We're doing many other things that I didn't even list on there yet. But most importantly, we have to be viable so that we can continue to be on the land and hold on to the land. And then what we put on our compost tea, well, first of all, our compost is made, we make it with different things, and we have different ways of making it. And we're trying our own different research projects of making our own compost. But we take onion skins, garlic skins, and parsley from a dehydrator, and they come and deliver their product all year long to our farm. Then we put it in rows, and we mix it with purchased manure that we buy from a neighbor. And then we have a compost turner that will turn, and we make our own compost with that. In terms of the compost tea, we make it with, you saw the machine that we put in, and we are making it around the clock, 24 hours a day, and putting it on. And we're using the Dr. David Johnson's bean compost that we've made. And then we also add different, depending on what land we're putting on, we will mix up and have a variety of different things that we're put into that mix of compost tea. It changes, and it changes from year to year.
Great, thank you so much. And it's so good to ground it with your real life experience and example, and making sure things are viable. You know, you can't just try every single idea or new practice out there, but really matching what works for your operation is definitely one of the take-home messages here. I feel like we have some interest in the Q&A on carbon sequestration. So we haven't really talked about this, Tim, but could you help us just to begin to understand the relationship between soil organic matter and actually storing carbon in the soil? And is the drier kind of farming region of California or climate compared to the Midwest, for example, really make it harder to sequester carbon. Can you speak to this a little bit, please?
Yeah, those are great questions. So just like, I'll try to keep this relatively brief. But just fundamentally, soil organic matter is about 58% carbon. So when we talk about soil organic matter, we're talking about mostly carbon. And the practices that, the principles that are behind soil health are often about getting more organic matter into soil, reducing the disturbance that can help that microbes that leads to loss of soil organic matter, and so both of these combined, often will increase the amount of organic matter in soil. And we could talk about this for hours. So, but in terms of I think that was a really interesting question about the sort of California potential. And there's been a lot of talk around in semi-arid regions, Mediterranean regions, how much potential really is there relative to wetter areas like the Midwest? I mean, certainly our soils just tend to store less carbon, right, than these prairie soils do. But we have examples of working farms. Rosie's is one, plenty of other examples in work that I've seen in Yolo County or in the Central Coast, where farmers have records of soil organic matter over their decades of management, and there is it can be increased. And it does have a role to play in terms of our state's kind of climate challenge and getting to carbon neutrality by 2040. I think that the last thing I'll say on this is that there are some interactions and challenges also related to the water side of things. Something like a cover crop does have to be managed carefully in an arid region, so that it doesn't consume more water than it actually brings into the system. That's not to, some people might say, well, cover crops are never, they're not applicable in some areas, or they just won't work here. They do work because farmers may have done it, but it does take really careful management in terms of timing and seed selection and all of that. So it's not as if we're without challenges here in this much more arid area in terms of using soils to store carbon, but it can work, and it can be done at scale if we kind of get at some of these barriers that we've talked about.
Great, thank you. I know that is kind of the hours-long conversation, so thanks for really helping us start out to understand how that looks, what that looks like, and comparing it to, kind of a Midwest, a different ag region with a different climate. In terms of kind of the soil health practice and water adoption, but also our water challenges, I think this is an interesting question about, do cover crops compete for water that a commercial or cash crop would need to utilize? Any of you, can you help us take that on?
Tim, would you like to say something first, and then I'll talk about ours?
Sure, I can talk really generically, and then you can actually make it real for us. I mean, cover crops, like any plant, are transpiring, right? They are using water from the soil, and so the question is, do they use more water than they increase in the soil profile? So they are also helping to intercept more water because less runs off. They are also acting as a mulch and reducing evaporation from soil. So it's in taking these things into consideration is going to be, are they using more than, are they adding more than they're using? And this gets back to that careful management. So I'll hand it back to Rosie.
Thank you. Tim, you highlighted it. It's about timing, and it's about the type of plants you have. But I would like to say that water is a cycle. So I don't believe that something is using more than another, because it is cycling. It is bringing life back to the microbes. We have to go back to what is soil health. And so if you're concentrating on your soil and the health of your soil, you've got to feed the microbes. So every time you're mowing down your cover crops, you're actually feeding the microbes in the soil. And the microbes in the soil is what I think is absolutely fascinating, because microbes work like a banking system to trade and bring together nutrients that the root system needs. And that's why diversity is so important, because you might have some microbes down 15 feet below the ground that will bring up rare minerals that the plant needs. So for me, when you're planting a cover crop, yes, it is using water, but the benefits outweigh the water use, because when you build these microbes and their habitat, they've had a drought in Australia for many years, and I've seen some amazing pictures where the microbes have actually exudated and protected the root during a drought system, where it doesn't die. It protects the root from drying out. So for me, it's not so much about water at the moment, it's about the long-term use of water as a cycling. And Tim so eloquently explained that the cycling of that water, when the water rains here in California, we need that cover crop to bring in the water into the ground so it replenishes the aquifers. We depend on those aquifers. We only have the snow and aquifers. That's our water for California. The rest of the time, I mean, we have water during the winter, but the rest of the time we do not have water coming in like they do in the, on the East Coast or the Midwest. So again, I just want to say that water is cycling, and it's never wasted when it is used for the benefit of the greater good of the microbes in the soil for health.
Thank you. I have such a bigger picture now in mind, instead of just comparing of like water use of one cover crop and what happens then to the next commercial crop. And really to all three of you, just thank you for expanding kind of the ways to think about such an important part of our systems and our living systems, including our soils. Thank you for your leadership, and I could not be more grateful for the conversation today.
Thanks for having us, Kelli. It's been really enjoyable.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Thanks for everybody for coming. And it was great to chat with you, Sara and Rosie.
It was a pleasure to be on, and especially thank you for the organizations with sustainable conservation that give us the platform to share our story, because it's sharing our story that helps educate. Education is the key to changing that paradigm shift.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being on today, folks. Take care.